We've come here today to speak to Christoph Heusgen in Berlin. For many years, he was Angela Merkel's foreign policy advisor. He was also Germany's ambassador to the United Nations. So he's one of Germany's most senior diplomats, and he's now the chairman of the prestigious Munich Security Conference. Ambassador Heusgen, thanks for joining DW. I want to start by talking about the diplomatic efforts that we see ongoing at the moment between Russia and Ukraine. We are beginning to see the possible contours of some kind of agreement involving neutrality of Ukraine and Ukraine receiving security guarantees from outside guarantors. Do you feel this is the kind of agreement that could bring an end to this war?
I have a fundamental problem, and that is that over the years there have been many agreements reached with Russia. I remind you of the so-called Budapest Memorandum in '94, where Russia guaranteed the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. I recall the Minsk Agreement, which was concluded after last time Russia invaded Ukraine. It was an agreement which said that there should be a ceasefire and they should withdraw their heavy weapons, and the monitors should be allowed to actually have their free way through all of the Donbass. And Russia didn't observe any of this. So my problem is that to agree with Russia today is very difficult, because Russia under Putin has lost all credibility. Nobody trusts that Russia will actually then implement an agreement it entered into.
And yet Putin is in power. This is the person who Zelensky is having to deal with, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. What choice does he have but to negotiate?
No, he doesn't have a choice. I just tell you what I think is the outcome. You cannot rely on this. Of course, Zelensky has to see to it that he gets a ceasefire. He has to see to it that Putin stops to bomb civilians, stops to commit war crimes.
Now, if Vladimir Putin does go down this road with an agreement of this type, this falls well short of the war aims that he seemed to be professing at the beginning of this war in those famous speeches he made. It made it sound like he had no respect for Ukraine as a sovereign state, and that he essentially wanted to effect regime change there. So what should we understand from the fact that he seems to be considering an agreement like this? Does it mean that he feels he's losing in Ukraine?
Yes, I think that he sees that what he built up in his fantasy about Ukraine that is very pro-Russian, where you have a pseudo government there, and there is no Ukrainian identity. He realizes that everything he thought Ukraine would be is not true. But so he's on the defensive. So I think he has a certain interest in maybe coming to a stop, because they are losing hundreds or thousands of soldiers. But we must not forget, you cannot trust Putin. So he may then agree to something, but then he will regroup and try again to achieve. You have to understand what his real game is. What is his? He is afraid that in Russia something happens that has happened in other countries in the neighborhood. That is, that countries, that the population is sick and tired of this post-Soviet oligarchic society, and he's afraid that this may happen in Russia as well. So therefore he has to stop all this. And for him, a successful Ukraine, a Ukraine that has a prosperous industry, prosperous economy, where you have democracy and all this, this may be a nightmare for him, because people in Russia will ask, how about us? And therefore he cannot allow Ukraine to succeed. And now he sees that all what he has been aiming for is crumbling.
How weakened is Putin? I mean, there's been some speculation about whether there could be a sort of palace coup against him in Russia. Do you think that is something that is a realistic prospect at the moment?
I cannot, I have no idea how this is. Everybody says, well, in Russia, this was under the Tsars and under Stalin, they could do with their population what they wanted to, so there is no danger for the ruler. On the other hand, we see, on Russian television, we see in the main news, there is somebody standing up for the journalist, and this sees that the people are become much more courageous. It's wonderful what you have from these young people, that they risk, like Navalny, they risk going to prison because they want another Russia. So I think Putin is in serious problems. How serious, I cannot tell you.
How concerned are you? I mean, there's a speculation also that Putin goes in the opposite direction. He doesn't sign an agreement, he doesn't back down, but he doubles down. He escalates his way through this. How big a concern is that for you?
You have to put yourself into his shoes. He sees that what he wanted to achieve he was not able to achieve. And he doesn't have any respect for human rights, for humanitarian law. You have seen what Putin has done to the citizens of Grozny. You have seen what Putin has done to the citizens of Aleppo. So there may be a danger that he is ready to double down. Yes.
And if he goes ahead and does that, what is the proper response, in your view, from the West? So far, the West has been remarkably united in terms of imposing very tough sanctions, but it has stopped short of sanctions, at least the Europeans have, on energy. Is that a card that you feel that Germany and the rest of Europe might at some point be forced to draw if Putin seriously escalates?
I think there has been really a remarkable united front of all the governments, this is not only Europe and the US. You have this worldwide alliance of countries. The votes at the UN were overwhelming. Putin today is supported by Kim Jong-un, by Assad, and Lukashenko. Can you imagine? So this is something which is really remarkable. I'm really surprised by the amount of solidarity we have in East European countries, in my own countries. People want to support Ukraine. They see what Putin is doing. Of course, to go down in the direction now of an energy, of a gas embargo is something very tough. It has serious repercussions. But right now there are plans to also by the Commission to see to it that we get faster to an independence of Russian energy. And I think people are ready to go ahead. I think that people will not allow Russia to do with Kiev what he has done to Aleppo and what he has done also to Grozny.
There are also more and more quite serious voices coming in and advocating some degree of intervention by NATO, whether it is in trying to create a so-called no-fly zone over Ukraine, or there was a proposal from the Polish side on this trip to Kiev to create what they described as a NATO peacekeeping force. Could there come a point where one of those options becomes a more serious one?
I think this is something the alliance has to discuss. So far, it is clear that NATO as an organization will not be involved. This is in the logic of the Atlantic Treaty. This is why also in 2008, the basic decision was taken that Ukraine and Georgia, that was Georgia at the time in the center of discussion, will not get a membership and not become a member of NATO because of the risk of a direct confrontation of a Third World War. So I think we will not go that way, not to risk a world war, but everything that is possible below that level, I think one should discuss and see how it is implemented.
And how close are we getting to maybe even an accidental clash of some kind? We saw a surveillance drone reportedly landing in Romania. We've got a lot of concern in Poland and other sort of Eastern NATO flank countries about what could happen.
Well, this is something we have lived through also during the Cold War. Russia and the United States, the Warsaw Pact and NATO, during all these many years of severe political crisis, were able to manage it in a way that there was no that direct confrontation. And I'm actually pretty optimistic that this doesn't happen. And if there are accidents, that they will be managed in a way that there is no escalation. I
want to take a step back at this point and just look at the bigger global picture, and particularly China. The Americans are saying that Russia has requested support and that China is already providing economic and financial support to the Russians. And the Americans saying that they are considering providing military support. What happens if China does go down that road? If China starts quite actively supporting Russia, does this then become a proxy war between China and the West?
Well, China has to make a choice. China has been also in the UN where I worked, and everybody they say and underline, the importance of national sovereignty. When we criticize China about what they do with Hong Kong, what they do with the Uyghurs, say, you have nothing to do with it. This is national sovereignty. And now there is their partner Russia invading Ukraine and violating national sovereignty. So I think that they are at pain to somehow not support but tolerate it, be kind to the Russians. So they are in a real problem, and they know if they now start actively to support Russia, that they lose their standing as a country that is trying to have in the world, kind of an alternative power, a country that stands also for, a new power in the United Nations that respects sovereignty and serves as kind of a model for other countries. If they go that way, they will lose credibility to a degree that they are not ready to accept, because then they are also siding with the pariah state. So I have my doubt. On the other hand, of course, they don't want to Putin and Xi are close. So Xi doesn't want to let Putin down, but he knows that Putin may drag him into something which then has serious repercussions, because I'm sure that the US and others are watching very carefully. And does he stay neutral, or does he get involved in an unacceptable way on the side of Russia?
And what would be the appropriate response for the West, but also particularly Europe, which has always been walking to some extent its own line towards China? If China does make that move, what's the appropriate response for Europe?
I think we have to get away from this notion of the West. We have to go to New York. We have to say this is international law. What Russia is doing is violating international law. And if China then also openly supports Russia in this, I think we have to bring it to the United Nations. Say this is a country that is now not respecting international law anymore, but supporting a country that is is a war, basically a war criminal and committing war crimes. And I think we should take it to the UN, but of course also discuss it between transatlantic partners. But this goes beyond. What we are witnessing here right now, what Russia is doing, is the violation of the very foundation of the order that was established after the Second World War. It's a violation of the UN Charter. It's a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this is nothing between West and East. This is actually an attack on the global international order.
Christoph Heusgen, thank you very much for taking time to speak to us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.